If you thought Starmer's shaky start was bad, brace yourself, because things are only going to get worse. We're diving into Labour's most recent blunders, focusing on their unpopular policies, which seem to be reaching a breaking point. Once again, we find ourselves amidst a crisis in our prisons. Before we go any further, don't forget to like and subscribe to our rapidly growing community. Let's break down how Labour's new government is gaining recognition, but not in a good way. Their decisions are divisive, unpopular, and seem to suggest that it's now acceptable to be hated, as long as it raises their profile. A major point of contention is the recent reduction in the winter fuel payment. For millions of retirees, this is a betrayal, given that Labour promised the opposite during their campaign. Rather than fulfilling pledges, Labour is shifting blame and pushing through policies that were never part of their manifesto. It seems they believe that being disliked now is worth it if it helps them stand out later. But the big question is, when the public goes to the polls in 2029, will they remember this, or will the damage already be too great? Next up, Labour's attempt to draw attention to the NHS crisis. Ministers are preparing to outline the full extent of the NHS's challenges, but don't be fooled. This is more about political manoeuvring than finding real solutions. Labour's plan: pin the blame on the Conservatives for their 2012 NHS reforms, which did indeed create fragmentation. But Labour also needs to consider the growing demands of an ageing population and the aftershocks of the pandemic. It's a classic narrative. Labour wants the public to believe that the Conservatives are solely to blame for the NHS's issues, even as they push through a number of controversial policies themselves. However, too much blame shifting might backfire on Labour. Let's turn to the prison system, where the number of inmates in England and Wales has reached a record high. In response, the government is rushing to release 3,000 prisoners early. But this doesn't include anyone convicted of serious crimes like sexual offences, terrorism, or domestic abuse. Critics see this move as a desperate attempt to ease prison overcrowding. Starmer has blamed the previous government for closing prisons without replacing them. But the question remains, is early release really tackling the root cause of the issue, or is it just a temporary solution? This move could lead to increased reoffending and homelessness among former prisoners. Now, let's talk about foreign aid. A recent study shows that British taxpayers are funding projects in countries that are wealthier than some parts of the UK, with money going to initiatives like traditional opera in Shanghai and cycling lanes in Mexico City. The Institute of Economic Affairs has called this Robin Hood in reverse, taking money from Britain's taxpayers and spending it where it's least needed. The study recommends rethinking aid priorities, suggesting that British funds should go to the most desperate regions, not cultural projects in wealthy cities. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, Chancellor Rachel Reeves made headlines by refusing to rule out a pension tax increase. Yes, you heard that right. When asked if pensions might be on the chopping block, Reeves gave no reassurances. According to the Fabian Society, Labour could cut tax relief on pensions for higher earners, potentially bringing in an extra £10 billion a year. But that's not all. They could also reduce the maximum tax-free lump sum retirees can withdraw from their pensions. The current 25% tax-free allowance could be slashed, hitting savers hard. Labour's potential pension reforms would disproportionately impact high earners and those with large pension pots, people who have worked hard their whole lives only to see a chunk of their savings taken by the government. These are more than just policy changes. This is an outright assault on financial security. And the attack on pensions doesn't end there. Labour could also require companies to pay national insurance on pension income, further increasing the tax burden on retirees. There's even talk of taxing inherited pensions, which could be a huge blow to families hoping to pass down their savings. Labour's pension strategy is looking more and more like just another piece in their puzzle of unpopular policies. Between tax hikes and pension cuts, it's clear the government is willing to make life harder for retirees and high earners to balance the books. But will the public tolerate this? Labour's bet is that the political pain now will pay off later. But this is a risky gamble. If the public decides they've had enough of broken promises, reckless spending, and endless taxes, the backlash could be catastrophic. As if the pressure couldn't get any higher, Labour is also heading for a showdown with union leaders at the upcoming Trade Union Congress in Brighton. You'd think, after negotiating pay deals that tackle inflation for workers like train drivers and doctors, Starmer might catch a break. But the unions are not coming quietly. They're demanding more pay, more investment, and higher taxes on the wealthy. This upcoming Congress won't be a walk in the park for Starmer. It's shaping up to be a political minefield, with each step carrying the risk of an explosion in his face. And it's not just about wages. The unions are furious at the government's approval of £2 billion in cuts to holiday pay, a move that affects over 1 million workers, particularly low-paid employees like caregivers and kitchen staff. Paul Nowak, General Secretary of the TUC, claims that the government stood by as employers stripped workers of their right to 28 days of paid leave, costing them an average of £1,800 each. Nowak isn't just angry at bad employers, he's also furious at Tory ministers, accusing them of turning a blind eye to workers being cheated out of basic rights. The unions are now pushing a 5-point plan to crack down on pay fraud and abuse, demanding more inspectors, tougher penalties, and stronger protections to stop exploitation of migrant workers.